Earth is full of a splendid array of plants, animals, and other organisms astonishingly different, but sharing common traits. Evolution explains the diversity, complexity, and ultimately the unity of life. A Streptococcus bacterium, a monkey, and this sidewinder could hardly be more distinct, but all are made of cells and share the same machinery for growth and development. What makes them so alike? In 1859, in his book On the Origin of Species, Charles Darwin astonished the world with an answer. Darwin presented the theory of evolution. He described it as the process by which every organism descends from ancestors similar, but not identical, to it. All living things, he reasoned, have the ability to reproduce. But resources to support a given population are limited. There is inevitably competition to mate, to find food and water, to survive. Since no two organisms are exactly alike, there is variety in the structure and behavior of each individual. Evolution favors the individuals most attractive to the opposite sex, best able to survive predators and to find prey. Darwin called this natural selection. He held on. The debate raged on nearly half a century after Darwin's death.
Dateline, Dayton, Tennessee, July 11th, 1925. In a moment, the story.
A young school teacher, John Scopes, was charged with teaching evolution in his classroom.
On the day of the trial, a full house of avid spectators from all over the nation filed in to hear the debate. The issue was no longer the innocence or guilt of Scopes, but rather the final death struggle between two basic human philosophies, fundamentalism versus modernism.
Scopes was found guilty and fined $100. And though the verdict was overturned on a technical point, the law against teaching evolution remained on the books in Tennessee until 1967. The conflict between scientific and religious explanations of life continues today. Just ask Baptist minister Jerry Falwell.
There's not a shred of evidence that will stand the test of time that denies the biblical account of creation. That when God created Adam and then took Eve out of the side of Adam, they were as complete as we are now, that there was no evolution, no change.
Scientists like Dr. John McCosker have a different perspective.
You know, the irony of all of this is that here we are, we've had email view about that controversial theory of natural selection. My response was, Madam, it is not controversial, and it's not a theory. It's a fact. I only wish that we could take everybody on this planet and send them to the Galapagos to see natural selection in action. It's so obvious here.
The evidence supporting the scientist's point of view is overwhelming. Biological adaptation is a part of everyday life. New flu viruses evolved surviving last year's vaccine. Insects evolved to survive our pesticides. And diseases like cholera and tuberculosis have outcompeted some of our antibiotics. Small, rapidly producing animals change far more quickly than more complex organisms like mammals. But over time, evolution occurs in all species on Earth. Nothing about the young Charles Darwin suggested he would grow up to be the sort of man who would change our view of the world. He loved hunting and beetle collecting far more than his formal studies. In fact, the young Darwin dropped out of medical school, much to the disappointment of his father, Robert Darwin, a doctor. Darwin finally managed to complete a course of study for the ministry at Cambridge, but he never served in a church. A round-the-world trip on a refitted warship, the Beagle, changed his calling. Darwin expected to travel for 2 years. Instead, he spent 5 years exploring and collecting and observing. The Galapagos Islands proved the most important stop on his voyage. Darwin observed that various species of tortoises and finches changed from island to island. He didn't realize the significance at the time, but the observations and his collections would eventually help lead him to the theory of natural selection. In 1836, Darwin came home with enough material to provide him with years of work. 3,000 pages of notes, over 1,500 species of insects, 4,000 skins, bones and dried specimens, and crates full of fossils. At 27, Darwin made cautious steps towards marriage. On a piece of paper, he recorded his reasons for and against the institution. On the plus side, he wrote, children, someone to take care of the house and companionship. Better than a dog, anyhow. Negatives included the loss of freedom and less money for books. But Darwin talked himself into marriage to Emma Wedgwood, saying, I shall never know French, or see the continent, or go to America, or go up in a balloon. Oh, never mind, my boy. There's many a happy slave. Darwin fathered 10 children and rarely left his home near London. But he never lost the freedom of his imagination. He wandered his estate pondering questions that his voyage and simple truths about breeding farm animals suggested. He wrote 3 hours a day. For 20 years, Darwin wrestled with the concept of evolution and natural selection, fully aware that his ideas would outrage those who believed God was responsible for all creation. He started with the familiar. For hundreds of years, people had been selectively breeding faster horses. Darwin called the process artificial selection. Our English horses, he said, differ from horses of every other breed, but they do not owe their difference and superiority to descent from any single pair, but to continued and selective breeding and training of many individuals during each generation. Darwin's book, On the Origin of Species, went on to tackle natural selection. In the real world, random genetic changes may improve an individual's ability to survive. Those organisms are naturally selected to improve their species, the way breeders attempt to artificially improve the horse. The book sold out the first day of publication and changed the way we look at life. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has become the unifying concept for biology. From so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. A lot of people laughed at paleontologist David Steadman when he made plans to go fossil hunting on the Galapagos Islands. Fossils are traces of animals or plants from the past, preserved in the Earth's crust. They are among the strongest pieces of evidence for evolutionary change. But they're rarely found in the lava rock that forms these islands.
A few people thought it was a good idea and said, go for it. Most people thought it was a silly idea. Some people told me that it was beyond silly and I should just get an elementary geology book and look it up and realize that the Galapagos are volcanic and that fossils are found in sedimentary rocks.
But Stedman persevered. He knew that these caves had indeed been carved out by flowing lava during volcanic eruptions. But he knew something else, and the knowledge kept him on the hunt.
There's a little species of barn owl that lives in Galapagos, and like barn owls everywhere, it eats different kinds of vertebrates, lizards, snakes, birds, bats, rats, things like that, and then digests the soft parts, coughs up a bony pellet. And the ledges that you see in this cave are perfect places for barn owls to roost. And so these really rich fossil sites that we excavate in lava tubes in Galapagos represent literally thousands of years of owl vomit. And by doing that, the owls are giving us this continuous record of what's going on with species in the islands.
In Barn Owl Cave on nearby Floriana Island, Stedman carefully worked his way down to sediment, some 12,000 to 14,000 years old. Here he learned that not all cave fossils have been coughed up by owls. Waiting for his discovery was a paleontologist's dream: the oldest tortoise shell ever found.
This particular tortoise specimen is really important because it's the oldest tortoise fossil that I have from the Galapagos. Assuming that this tortoise is 12 or 14,000 years old, we can extract DNA from that bone, compare it with DNA from modern tortoises, and see what kinds of genetic changes have occurred in the last 12 or 14,000 years. And because Galapagos is such a mecca for studies of evolution, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle that's missing.
Stedman's tortoise wasn't his only find. He's collected as many as 40,000 bones of bats, birds, lizards, and other animals, all ready to tell their evolutionary tales. One story is already established by the fossil record.
What I've discovered in Galapagos is that there's essentially no extinction going on before the arrival of people. In other words, the floras and faunas out here are getting richer and richer with time until the arrival of people. Boom. That's the big event that throws a monkey wrench into the whole process.
Such new information fuels Stedman's delicate search for more evolutionary history on these islands.
This cave has now become, after this excavation, maybe the most important fossil site we have so far in the Galapagos. This is my 10th trip down here. I was starting, and 5th trip to Floriana, to this individual island. So I was starting to think, well, maybe there's not much more to learn here. But as always, when I start thinking that, I'm wrong.